The case of the Bell Witch haunting may very well be the greatest ghost story in American history. The tale has captivated, amused, and terrified curious audiences for over 200 years. In recent times, it's become the primary inspiration for several books, movies, and television shows that add their own twist onto the age-old legend. But what actually happened all those years ago to warrant an anecdote that has survived the test of time? It all began in the early 1800s when John Bell and his family moved from North Carolina to the Red River area of Robertson County, Tennessee. This area today is known as Adams, Tennessee. John Bell purchased a plot of land and a large house for his family to settle down in. Over the coming years, he slowly accrued more and more land, increasing his total holdings to 328 acres, a large amount of which were cleared and made into fields for planting. At first, the Bell family's transition to Tennessee was going smoothly. The adults and children had made new friends, and John and his wife Lucy had 3 more children after relocating. John had even become an elder of the Red River Baptist Church. Life was good and the Bells were finding success in their new permanent residence. The beginning of our ghost tale started on a relatively ordinary afternoon in 1817. John Bell was gazing out across his cornfield when he locked eyes with a creature unlike anything he had ever witnessed before. The animal had the body of a dog but the head of a rabbit, and it startled Mr. Bell at first glance. Without much hesitation, John raised his rifle and fired several shots at the animal, which scampered away quickly and vanished without being struck by any bullets. At the time, Bell dismissed it as a strange occurrence and nothing more. But in retrospect, this was his first encounter with an entity that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After he had finished eating dinner that evening, his entire family began hearing loud and mysterious banging and beating sounds on the outside walls of the log home. Although they investigated, they weren't able to find any concrete reason for the interruption. The strange sounds continued with increased frequency and force each coming night. In addition to the banging, the Bell children began to wake up frightened in the middle of the night. They relayed to their parents that rats were gnawing at their bedposts and that they felt a strange presence watching over them. Soon thereafter, the children began experiencing their bed covers being forcibly pulled off them, and their pillows tossed on the floor by a seemingly invisible manifestation. While the entire family was incredibly perturbed by these happenings, no one was physically injured and there wasn't much they could do to combat the spectral terrors. As time progressed, the Bell family became accustomed to their intermittent supernatural incidents, and they tried their best to cope with it. However, to their dismay, the entity was just getting started. Over time, the intensity of their interactions would heighten. The Bells began hearing soft, whispering voices, almost incomprehensible and too weak to fully understand. The first account sounded like a frail old woman singing hymns. Once the entity had discovered its voice, it was as if a flip had been switched, and the encounters had escalated to an extreme degree. The Bells' youngest daughter, Betsy, began experiencing violent and horrific encounters with the ghost. It would reportedly pull her hair and slap her over and over, often leaving handprints and even welts on her face and body. Up to this point, John Bell had sworn his family to secrecy, with the legitimate fear that anyone he told would think him to be crazy. With the newly escalated situation, he finally caved and confided in his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Understandably skeptical, but seeing the obvious pain on Bell's face, Johnston agreed to see if there was any way that he could help. First, he needed to witness the entity for himself so he and his wife would spend the night in the Bell home. After an uneventful start to their evening, their nerves were calmed, and they retired for the evening. It was only after the lights went out that the entity revealed itself. Johnston and his wife experienced these same supernatural anomalies that the Bell family had mentioned, including having their sheets ripped from them and being physically slapped by the invisible sentience. Johnston sprang out of the bed exclaiming, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" This seemed to dismiss the spirit as the rest of the night was peaceful from that point onward. The next morning, Johnston explained to the Bells that he thought the culprit was an evil spirit, citing it would be similar to the kind that the Bible talks about. In the coming days, the entity grew, seemingly more powerful. Its voice strengthened and became loud and unmistakable. It seemed religious in nature. It would sing hymns, quote scripture, carry on intelligent conversations, and reportedly quoted word for word 2 sermons that were preached at 2 different churches on the same day, and at the same time but in different areas. Without much realistic recourse, the Bells were at its mercy. However, word of the entity spread like wildfire, even reaching outside of the settlement and being discussed as far away as Nashville. That's where Major General and future President Andrew Jackson heard about the tale and decided to visit the Bell residence for himself. He supposedly had several encounters with the entity, later being quoted as saying that he would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch. Despite the horrifying reality of living in a bona fide haunted house, young Betsy Bell had managed to find love when she had reciprocated affections with Joshua Gardner, a young man who lived nearby. With the blessings of their parents, they decided to marry, and the news brought some desperately needed joy to an otherwise terrified family. Everyone was very pleased with the engagement, with the exception of the unknown entity, who immediately became furious and repeatedly ordered Betsy not to marry Joshua. Despite their strong affections for one another, the ghost made itself very clear by pestering Betsy and Joshua at every given opportunity. It became so intrusive that the two could not go to the river, the fields, the cave, or other areas around the property without the entity nagging them. The constant pressure and harassment was too much for Betsy Bell to handle, and on Easter Monday of 1821, she broke off her engagement with Joshua. The Bell Witch had won. Seemingly appeased that things had gone in her favor, the ghostly disturbances noticeably decreased for a period after the broken engagement. But it wasn't long before the entity came back with a continued vengeance, this time aiming her sights wholly on John Bell. She continuously expressed her disdain for the head of the Bell family, relentlessly vowing to kill him. As time progressed, John Bell began experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing. What started as minor inconveniences slowly manifested into full-blown ailments, eventually confining him to his home due to his weakened state. It's said that the ghost would continuously remove his shoes when he tried to walk, and would slap him in the face when he recovered from his frequent seizures. John Bell slipped into a coma on December 19, 1820, and one day later he breathed his last breath. Immediately after his death, his family found a vial of unrecognizable black liquid in the cupboard. John's son had sprinkled 2 drops on the cat's tongue, who had a violent reaction to the concoction, and it was dead within minutes. Supposedly, the entity excitedly announced that she had given John a big dose of it the night prior, which had fixed him for good. John Bell had one of the largest funerals ever held in Robertson County, Tennessee. Friends, acquaintances, and even just curious townsfolk attended from many miles away. 3 preachers, 2 Methodist and 1 Baptist, eulogized him. It's said that as the crowd of mourners dispersed from the graveyard, the Bell Witch laughed and sang a song as she realized her ultimate victory. Thereafter, the entity's presence in the Bell home was almost non-existent. She had achieved what she had set out to accomplish. What do you think? Do you believe that malevolent entities like the Bell Witch exist? Was this an elaborately concocted story, or are there elements of truth to this seemingly unimaginable ghost tale? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you back here next week with another video.